Okay, so this is in some ways review. We met the community tipping point. We know what those are, but again, we're learning about them by actually applying them. A lot of understanding what's happening with Virginia means understanding European history, what's happening in England. Why is it that England all of a sudden is able to establish this first permanent colony in 1607? We're not doing all of that. I'll give you some brief information just so it makes sense. But England essentially is late to the game. Spain and other nations were much more powerful, much more successful in planting colonies in the New World. England is kind of jealous in a sense, but they're not really in a position to do anything about it until the late 1500s and early 1600s. They finally break through. Right? So Jamestown in 1607 is finally founded by a group of people with some Englishmen with some money, basically. Right? They put their money together. They formed what was called the London Company, later called the Virginia Company, and they want to make money. Right? This is important because it gives you some idea about the motivation for founding the colony of Virginia. Jamestown is founded in 1607. This is 13 years before the Pilgrims are going to land up in the Northeast, right? When they're coming for religious freedom, all that kind of stuff. Right? Virginia wasn't about that. Virginia was about making money, dollars and cents, plain and simple. These guys want to get a return on their investment. They think that if they can found a colony, they can get rich quick, kind of like the Spanish were doing in the New World. All these precious metals and such, right? England thinks that they can kind of do that. So economics is going to be a major motivator here, long before a system of racial slavery is even thought of in this sense. So think about economics in the construction of these categories. Think about how race, class, and gender are going to fit into it. I'll give you a couple of dates here, but not too much. Nothing you can't sort of handle. You don't have to get all the details, but I want you to think about the big picture in terms of these motivations. So Jamestown is founded in 1607. 1607. They think they're going to get rich quick. Right? The stories that were being told were that if we can just get to Virginia, there's going to be gold laying in the streets. We'll pick it up, basically, take it back to England and get rich. You get a bunch of young men coming from England that think they're going to get rich quick. Right? Think they're going to overnight essentially be wealthy. So much so that they don't even take the time really to build like strong houses. Right? They don't really take the time to plant crops. They think they're going to get rich quick. They don't think they're going to stay here permanently. Right? It's about getting rich quick. And this is disastrous early on. You know some of the stories about the early colony of Virginia, right? Founded in 1607. By 1609, 1610, folks are starving, literally starving to death. Right? The winter from 1609 to 1610 is called the starving time. People are writing letters about how horrible it is in Virginia, how it's a death trap, essentially. I think 500 colonists are here in 1609 winter. By spring, only about 60 are left. Literally, they're starving. They're writing letters home about people eating rats if they can catch them, because there's nothing to eat. It's cold. They don't have proper housing. There were stories about cannibalism, folks eating each other. The guy ate his wife because stuff is so bad. So this is literally the starving time, 1609, 1610. Thankfully, they get assistance, especially from the local native groups and others, and they survive at least those 60, and then more are going to come. Eventually, as we know, more and more come. But early on, this is like Virginia is a death trap. It's a death trap. Discipline is going to be a major problem in the early colony. Discipline is a major problem. Again, you're going to see how this plays out here in a second in these laws. So much so that some of the names that you know, like Captain John Smith, who kind of takes control of the colony, imposes almost a military-type discipline. He says, look, we're going to lose everything if we don't get some discipline here. He institutes certain rules like everybody has to work. Even the wealthy Englishmen coming over that were not used to working, they had servants for that. He says, no, everybody works. All kinds of crimes might be punishable by death. Even blasphemy was punishable by death in some of these early laws of Virginia. And they're looking for a new way to make some money. Remember, the investors are like, look, we need a return on this investment. They do not find the gold that they expect to find. But pretty soon they're going to find something that takes its place. They are going to find something that takes its place, and that thing is going to be tobacco. Tobacco. A guy named John Wall is able to successfully get a form of tobacco that was being grown in the Caribbean and grow it here in Virginia. About 1614, about 5 years after the colony, he's able to do that. By 1616, 1617, they're actually able to grow some good-sized tobacco crops, which can be shipped back to England and get some money. Tobacco at this point in Europe is exploding. As we know, it's a drug, right? It's addictive. So folks in Europe are loving tobacco. Think about how drugs work. Initially, King James in England says, no, this is unholy. I'm going to ban the use of tobacco. Eventually, he changes his mind. He says, you know what? Maybe we should legalize it, put a tax on it, and make some money. This is what happens. I kind of like some other things we're more familiar with today. You know, alcohol is a drug. It is legal, right? Tax on it, makes billions of dollars. Weed, the whole movement to legalize weed, it's happening in some states. Put a tax on it. Denver, Colorado's talking about how much money they're making. Put that to other uses. Make the society successful. So think about the economic motivations that are happening here, especially once tobacco is put in place and becomes their goal, essentially. Tobacco was like crack. Folks are making big money, despite the health issues and the other issues that might be associated with that. Now again, early on, the settlers to Virginia are mostly young, single men. Young, single men that come here to get rich quick. You're not getting older, established, married, calm men. You're getting young bucks, basically, that come here to make money. Now, what do we know about having a bunch of young men with no women, no European women yet? If you have a bunch of young, unattached men in Virginia, what do you think that society is going to be like? Stable or unstable? Let me ask it another way. That's too historical. If you're at the club on a Friday night, and there are a bunch of young, unattached men and no women, what's that club like? Stable or unstable? Unstable. Somebody gonna fight and stepped on my shoe, right? Shooting, violence. That's essentially what Virginia is like. Very unstable, conflict. These guys aren't concerned with stability. They're not building houses and picket fences. Right? They're trying to get rich and go home quick. They don't want anybody telling them what to do. They don't want to follow any rules. That's exactly what's going on. And so these investors are like, this society is not working. People are dying. It's lawless. How do we calm it down? How do we make it stable? They're going to find various ways to do that. But initially, it's a very unstable crop. Tobacco helps to do that economically because now it's profitable. You can produce this tobacco crop, send it back to England and help the mother country, right, the nation. So tobacco is a major role. By 1617, you're able to send tobacco back to England and justify your existence, basically, justify the investment. But there are three problems with tobacco, at least three problems with tobacco. One, lack of diversification. Once tobacco starts making big money, nobody wants to grow anything else. And so all these young men tobacco's making $100, okay, I'm planting that. Why don't you plant a little corn so we have something to eat next? No, I can't use the land for that. Every piece of land I have is going to be for tobacco. Leads to instability. It's a lack of diversity. As econ majors, you want to diversify your portfolio, right? In case something happens in one area. What happens if the tobacco crop gets wiped out? You have no money and you're starving. So it's very unstable. This is actually going to be a problem in the South moving forward, a lack of diversity and over-reliance on cash crops. First, a reliance on tobacco, later a reliance on cotton. So this lack of diversification is one problem. Another problem with tobacco, soil exhaustion. Soil exhaustion. Tobacco pulls nutrients out of the soil, wears out the soil. So for example, if this room was our nation, if this room was Virginia, or part of Virginia, we're growing tobacco on it. If we grew a tobacco crop for 3 straight years in this room, nothing else would grow for 10 years. You had to let it lie fallow, as they say, for about 10 years while it regenerates, especially before they could borrow fertilizer techniques and such from the Native Americans and really help the soil recover more quickly. It wears out the soil. Well, what happens? Just think about this. If you're making good money with tobacco, we grew 3 straight years worth of tobacco here, and we're making good money. And now all of a sudden it won't grow in here. What do you think we're going to do as a colony or as a nation? Are we just going to stop growing tobacco? What do we do? What's our solution? Somebody said it. What are we going to do? Move. Let's go over and see what the next room has. They got some good land over there. They're not using it, right? What if they have a problem with it? Well, we're going to take it from you. So these Native American groups that are surrounding the colony find themselves being encroached upon as the colony expands, especially because they need more and more land. That's going to lead to conflict, right? Room 213 might have a problem with the fact that we're coming into their traditional lands. They might fight back. Be some violence that happens. So again, there's instability there, mainly because of the needs of the tobacco crops. So soil exhaustion is the second issue. Third is tobacco crops are labor intensive. It's hard work. It's hard work. Not everybody wants to do hard work. They're trying to get rich quick. For example, it takes about 9 months out of the year to plant and monitor it and harvest it, especially during harvest time. You might work 12, 14-hour days. Not everybody wants to do that hard work repeatedly, even though they want the money from it. So there's going to be a labor problem early on. There'll be a labor problem early on. Remember, if colonists are dying faster than they're coming, you need more and more labor because there's more and more demand for the tobacco. So various incentives are going to be used to try to help the colony grow, to try to get more people here to work and produce tobacco. I'll talk quickly about a couple of the incentives that play into these laws, that play into the categories of race, class, and gender. The land ownership incentives. So to encourage settlements, the London Company awards small plots of land to men who finish their duty to the company. So you work for the company, then you can get your own little piece of land. You can be an independent, free farmer. There are a couple of different types of folks that say, okay, that sounds like a good deal. First is head right system. Head right system, 1616. They instituted what they called the head right system. Basically what this system was, if you could pay your own way, you could buy a ticket from England to Virginia. You could pay to get on the boat. When you arrived in Virginia, you'd be given 50 acres of land. 50 acres of land. You could just buy the ticket. All you got to do is get here. So if you have a little bit of money and you're a British subject, you might say, this is a great way to make some money. Let's go get some land, get 50 acres. I'll plant some tobacco. We'll make good money. In addition to the 50 acres for everyone that could pay their own way, if you could pay someone else's way, you get an additional 50 acres. So what if your husband, you want to pay for yourself to come, your wife to come, and your 2 kids to come? Become tobacco farmers. How much land would you get if you guys came? Our math majors in here. How much land would that family get? Husband, father, and 2 children can pay their own way to come to Virginia. How much land would they get according to the head right system? 200 acres. That's a nice chunk of land. Pay your own way. So some folks that have a little bit of money, a little bit extra spending cash, say, this is great. Let's go. We can make more money. Right? Kind of early capitalism. Invest, make more money. Most folks don't have that kind of money. Even most Englishmen, most white Englishmen don't have that kind of money. The majority of folks coming to Virginia, the majority of Englishmen coming to Virginia in the 1600s and 1700s come as indentured servants. Indentured servants. They don't have the money to pay the ticket. They don't have the money to pay the ticket. So what indentured servitude is you get somebody to pay your way. Get somebody to pay your way. Look, I'll go to Virginia. Right, things aren't going so well for me here in England. Right, there's a huge homeless problem in London, the London streets at this time. A lot of farmers are running out of land. So if you're a poor farmer with no land in London, you might say, hey, it's worth the risk to go to Virginia, even though folks are not living so long in Virginia. The average lifespan in Virginia early on is 39 years old. But some are like, look, I'm starving here. I'm going to go out there and at least take a shot. What they do is they sign an indenture contract. Most indentured servants signed a contract that said, I'll work for you for between 4 and 7 years. 4 and 7 years, they indenture themselves to someone else. When they're done with those 4 to 7 years, though, they get freedom. They get a piece of land, some tools, maybe a mule, a little cabin probably, and they get set. They're independent farmers. They can farm their own land at that point. So if you survive those 4 to 7 years, you're good. You can start fresh. So a lot of folks are like, this is great, especially if you're doing poorly in Europe. It makes sense to try this indentured servitude thing in this new colony of Virginia. So most people come this way in this early period. However, most of the people coming are young, unattached men. So much so that men outnumber women 6 to 1 in early Virginia. Men outnumber women 6 to 1 in early Virginia. Now we know something about men and people generally. They don't get together. Yet there aren't enough women here, not enough European women here. This is going to play out in some of these laws. People start connecting across the color line in early Virginia. There are native women, and eventually there are going to be African women here too. So this lawlessness, this instability is still a problem in early Virginia. This is an advertisement for indentured servitude. Try to get people to come, right? You literally got advertisements in the newspapers. Come to Virginia, it's a great place, blah, blah, blah. Now, over time, some of these servants start writing letters back, like, hey, don't come. We're starving, right? They treat us badly, we might be getting beaten, poor food, no shoes. So eventually, the stream of indentured servants starts to slow up, and they look for another labor source. 1619 is a very important tipping point, and this leads to our laws here. 1619. I remember Virginia's founded in 1607. 1614, Mr. John Rolfe kind of figures out the tobacco thing. By about 1617, they're really making money at it. 1619 now, 12 years after the colony is founded, 3 important things happen that are really serve as a tipping point. First, the Virginia Company says, hey, we got to get some women there. This place is too like the Wild West. Get some women there to calm these guys down. The men are demanding wives, so on and so forth. Send some women over. So they do. They send women over to become wives for these planters. Second thing, not really important for our purposes here, but the second thing is the founding of what they called the House of Burgesses. House of Burgesses. Basically what that was a local governing body. Rather than having to wait for the King of England to make all the rules of the Virginia Company, they found their own kind of local government here in Virginia in 1619. Now that's significant for American history because some people say this is kind of the first step on the road eventually to revolution, right? You got your own government. You're making your own rules. Eventually you're going to be like, what do we need a king for? Right? We can make our own rules. But it's going to take about 150 years to get there. So women, local government. Lastly, for African American history, the third event might be the most important. 1619, the first 20 Africans are dropped in Jamestown. First 20 Africans are dropped in Jamestown. What happened was a Dutch ship that had acquired some slaves was having trouble getting back to Europe. They decided they need to trade something for some water, some food, some supplies to make it home. They said that they trade these 20 Africans. So 20 Africans get dropped in the middle of this economic situation, and we're going to see what happens with them. All right, we're going to see what happens with them. So 3 things: women, local government, first 20 Africans. All right. Now again, there aren't many Africans yet in Virginia. The majority of the labor force are indentured servants, and indentured servants could be white, black, some Native American, in fact. You could basically enslave them for a period, maybe decide to free them, maybe not. So we want to talk about this transition from servitude to the racial slavery that we see, which doesn't end until 1865. Some people say indentured servitude is not working out, especially once the colony starts to get a little more stable, once people start living a little longer. More and more people start outliving that 4 to 7 years, and they demand their land, right? They demand their tools, like, hey, I'm done. I want that good piece of land over there. Right? More and more people are getting their freedom. Indentured servants are starting to cause some problems, as we'll see. And we're going to see how folks respond to that. Right? How ultimately we switch to a system where African slavery is going to be the primary. Again, we're going to see how race is socially constructed, how gender is socially constructed, and how class also is socially constructed by looking at some of these examples here. And I'll pull them up for you on the top. Just going to point out some of the key ones. Right? There's some key court cases, some key laws, and we're going to unpack them and look at them really quickly. Again, we want to figure out how does black get constructed, How does white get constructed? How does man, woman get constructed? How does middle class, upper class get constructed? We can look at the laws and figure that out, just like we were looking at the laws of Reconstruction, right, to get a sense of what was happening in Reconstruction. So I want to look at the first case. Read some volunteers. Now these are some court cases and laws from early Virginia, from the books of early Virginia. So the language is a little bit complicated, but we can figure out what they're saying. We want to figure out exactly what they're saying, why it's significant. First case is about Mr. Hugh Davis. Hugh Davis is a white Virginian who finds himself in some trouble. Mr. Hugh Davis finds himself in some trouble. We get a volunteer to read that for me, if you can see this, or if you can see the one that you have. Get somebody to read this Hugh Davis case for me so we can find out, one, what his crime was, and two, how he's going to be punished. Let me get a volunteer to read that, please. One brave soul.
Hugh Davis to be soundly whipped before accepted heroes and others who remove themselves to the honor of God, the shame of Christianity, like following his body and mind of the people, which fall he is the action and Sabbath.
Good, good. It's not this difficult language, so it's good that you're working through that. You may have a law career in your future, whether you knew it or not. So Hugh Davis, what's he got? First of all, what does he do? What's his crime? Had sex with a black woman? Now, does it say woman in there? No, but we can assume that it was a woman, because that would have been a whole other can of worms in Colonial Virginia, right? But good. That was his transgression. There are already, what the laws show you quite often is what's a concern in the society, right? Quite often laws are made when there's seen as some problem in the society. Right? In this case, you're already seeing the mixture across the color line. Some people are seeing that as a problem. We'll talk about some of the reasons why. And at least those that are in charge of the society are seeing it as a problem. So Davis has slept with a black woman, right? You can look at the language actually and how it's described. Like it's seen as a religious kind of sin as well as a crime. Right? Shame of Christianity, dishonor of God, he defiled his body in line with the Negro. So what's his punishment going to be in 1630? Remember, this is the white guy. What's his punishment going to be? What's going to happen to him? Don't get whipped. Soundly whipped. Right? So they said, look, whip him soundly. This is no joke. He's going to get whipped in front of a crowd, right? Soundly whipped before an assembly of Negroes and others. So he's going to get whipped in front of everybody. This white guy's getting beat in front of Negroes. That in and of itself might seem fairly significant. So you can already tell that this sort of sex across the color line is a problem, right, for at least some people in this society. For at least some in this society. Let's skip down. Look at 1640. We've interpreted the punishment. White male is being whipped. He's whipped before an audience. There's kind of a shaming there. Right? He has to apologize, but he's also getting whipped. The language of the ruling is significant. I would say this is about race and gender, right? Race and gender are being controlled or regulated in the laws. '40 case, Mr. Robert Sweat finds himself in trouble. 10 years later, same colony. 10 years later, Mr. Robert Sweat has done something. I'll read this one really quickly. In Sweat, 1640, the defendant, Robert Sweat, had begotten a child, a Negro woman servant, belonging to Lieutenant Shepard. So what's Sweat's crime? Black girl pregnant. So would you think that his crime is more or less harsh than what Davis has done in the first case? You think he's going to be punished more before you read, or less? Is his crime worse or harsher or less? It's harsher. Not only has he had sex across the color line, but there's a child that's going to be produced, right? They specifically mention, hey, she's pregnant. This is a whole other can of worms. What else complicates this? What else makes this different than that first case? That's a big part of it, this idea that a child being produced that is complicating the racial structure already. Right? It's going to be a half white, half black child. So then, since the crime is worse, we would assume that Sweat's going to be punished worse than Davis was, right? What happens though? The Negro woman shall be whipped at the whipping post, and the said Sweat shall tomorrow in the forenoon do public penance. Public penance is basically he has to apologize publicly in front of the society, right? Public penance for his offense at James City Church according to the divine service. So does he get punished more or less than Mr. Davis 10 years earlier? Less. Right? If you got to choose between apologizing publicly and getting whipped like Hugh Davis, or just apologizing publicly like Robert Sweat, which one would you choose? Sweat, right? I keep your whipping. I'm sorry, right? Now, again, it's interesting because his crime is seen as worse. And one of the reasons his crime would have been seen as worse is because of the third character. Who's the third character mentioned in this court case? Lieutenant Shepard. Good. We've got some legal scholars in here. Lieutenant Shepard is probably a major part of the anger in this case. Not only is the society nervous about this sex, but what's Lieutenant Shepard's beef? Why is he in this? What's Lieutenant Shepard mad about? Yeah, that's his property, exactly. The impregnated servant belongs to him. Say he has a contract with her 4 to 7 years, she's only worked for a year. Now she's pregnant. Is she going to be able to work as hard? No, right? He essentially has stolen from Lieutenant Shepard. Lieutenant Shepard might be the one that turned him in. Because this is an economic violation as well as a kind of racial violation. Yet, Sweat is getting punished less. And who's getting punished more in this case? The black woman. They don't even mention a punishment for the unnamed black woman in the first case. Yet in this one, she's pregnant. She's getting whipped. So you're already seeing a shift in the legal system around issues of race. Who's being blamed for this, even though it's seen as worse, he gets punished less, and the black woman is really getting punished more. You didn't even need all this. Skip down to 1662. 1662 was a major tipping point in American history, which we can refer to as the law of matrilineal descent. Law of matrilineal descent. Now, there's some big words in there, but we can break them down. Patrilineal descent is the way most Western societies work. Patrilineal descent. What does that mean? Where do you get your last name from in the United States? Father's side, patrilineal. Matrilineal means mother's line. Father's line, mother's line. This is the way it worked in England, and this is the way it was transferred over. So patrilineal, your father's inheritance and name and all that. Your status essentially comes from your father. So now think about these cases. You have a white male and a black woman. If that woman is a slave, right, we're trying to figure out when does slavery begin. It's a major question in American history. When does racial slavery begin? I say that woman was a slave. Right? If she has a child with a white male that's free, what would the child's status be? Once you get to 1662, that's the case. But before 1662, the child would be free. I think about the governor of Virginia, right? If he has a servant, and he impregnates her in 1661, if they have a child, he can send that child to the best schools in the land, and that child will be free. Some people think this is a problem, right? Because more and more children are being born that are not servants, that are not required to pick tobacco. Remember the economics. So they changed the law. The law specifically changed in 1662. 55 years after the founding of the colony, you're going to get this major change. The law of matrilineal descent. So let's look at it. Have you ever put something there to hand up? Look quickly at this law, and we'll break it down. It's very significant in terms of the development of a racial form of slavery. In 1662, Act 12, children got by an Englishman upon a Negro woman shall be bond or free according to the condition of the mother. Bond or free according to the condition of the mother. So no longer is it based on your father, at least not for African Americans. Your status is not based on your father's side, it's going to be based on your mother's side. For Europeans, it's still on your father's side, but for African Americans, it's based on your mother's side. Now, think about the timing of this. In 1662, there is a major debate in American history as to when racial slavery really begins. Some folks say the first 20 Africans that got dropped off in 1619, They were slaves. Many historians say, no, they weren't really slaves. They were indentured servants because was not a system of slavery in place. It takes some time for the system of racial slavery to develop. So sometime between 1619, when those first 20 arrived, and the 1660s, when these laws start getting passed, we have a tipping point. At some point, you have racial slavery in place. By 1700, there are more slaves than African white indentured servants. It's tipped towards racial slavery. But we still don't know exactly when that line is. Right? Some folks say by the 1640s, you can kind of see a system of racial slavery in place by looking at some of these laws. Definitely, everybody agrees by the 1660s, you have racial slavery. It's here. You can see it clearly. You can find it in the laws. But at some point in there, it's still a little cloudy. We'll come back to those dates as to, this is usually called the chicken and the egg debate in American history. Which came first, slavery or racism? Did slavery cause racism, or did racism cause racial slavery? There's still some debates about that. Let's finish this first, and we'll work our way backwards. Children got by an Englishman upon a Negro woman shall be bond or free according to the condition of the mother. And if any Christian shall commit fornication with a Negro man or woman, he shall pay double the fines of a former act. So that last part, you can see this is really getting serious. They're saying, look, we need to stop this mixture across the racial line, right? You get double the fines. But this first part is really, really important. Children die by an Englishman upon a Negro woman shall be bond or free according to the condition of the mother. Now, if the governor of Virginia has sex with a slave and a child is produced, that child's a slave. If Thomas Jefferson, later president of the United States, has sex with his female slave, Sally Hemings, which he did, produces African American children, which he did, they're slaves, which they were. Despite the fact he's president, doesn't matter the father's status. It's a major tipping point, a major change in the whole legal system. Why? Issues of race, issues of economics. They wanted to close the loophole of producing all these children that weren't required to produce tobacco. So the money plays into it, the race plays into it. Race, gender are being constructed. This category, what it means to be black, means something. Right now it's really important. These categories are really important, even though they're being constructed, socially constructed. So think about the race and the gender there. Right? The race and the gender determine your class, really. Go backwards a little bit, though. Over time, what you're going to see is more and more of these laws get put into place until a whole system is in place. We don't necessarily need to belabor that. Those three cases can point out the race and the gender part. Look at, I'll come back to that. Race and class. We looked at race and gender. What about race and class? Now, race and class are operating together. I just got done telling you that there are white indentured servants, black indentured servants early on, Native Americans. They work there 4 to 7 years. They're supposed to be free like anybody else. Now, over time, that's going to start to change. And over time, as people live longer, the category of indentured servants is not seen as economically as viable. Remember, people are living 39 years of age is the life expectancy early on in Virginia, 39. So a lot of folks aren't even living long enough to outlive their indenture contract. But over time, folks start living better, the society gets a little healthier. Now you're getting all these people demanding their freedom. I'm done on my contract. I need some land, tools, mules, hook me up, let's go. These indentured servants are getting together and doing things. Black and white indentured servants are considering themselves members of the same class. Hey, we're all workers. What does it matter if you're black or white? Let's tired of him. Rising up, doing things, burning stuff down. There's a major revolt in Virginia in 1676 called Bacon's Rebellion. Indentured servants literally burned Jamestown to the ground over some stuff. So some people are saying, oh, we need a different system. All these indentured servants, especially white indentured servants, is not going to work. We need an identifiable group of people that are going to be laborers and workers. Well, how about all these Africans? Can't we just bring in Africans and do that? That's going to be ultimately the decision that they make. So early on, the imagined community of class of indentured servants might be black, white, and others. We're going to start to see how that gets changed, how folks are going to pass specific laws to break people up based on race, even if their class is the same. So this a good example of this is the 1641 case, John Punch. And this is why some people say that racial slavery may start in the 1640s. Look at the John Punch case. Now, what happens basically in this case, just to give you some background, is three indentured servants, two white indentured servants, one black indentured servant, run away together. They're tired of their treatment or whatever, maybe they got abused that day, and they say, you know what, enough is enough, I'm out. They leave Virginia and go over to Maryland. Maybe they wanted to come to Bowie State homecoming, I don't know, they heard, we're fresh over here. They run away, but they get caught. So they've committed a crime. Right? They're still under an indenture contract, and they've basically stolen themselves. Right? They've basically stolen themselves. So let's see what happens here. The crime. In regarding Negro John Punch. John Punch was the name of the black indentured servant. 1641. 3 runaway servants, 2 white and 1 black. John Punch. Captured in Maryland. Each was sentenced to be whipped. Right? That's going to be their initial punishment. They're going to get whipped. So on your way. But the judicial parity stopped at the whipping. Basically, their punishment is going to vary. They're all whipped, but the rest of their punishment is going to be different based on other factors. The court then went on to impose different sentences for the same crime. Remember, they all 3 run together. Right? They did the same crime. We're going to see how they're punished differently. One called Victor, a Dutchman. She's white, Dutchman. The other, a Scotchman called James Gregory, white. Shall first serve out their times with their master according to their indentures. So what does that mean? Let's say all 3 of these guys signed a contract for 7 years, which was average. They run away after 3 years. Right? They're like, you know what, I'm tired of this. I got 4 more years, I can't take it, I'm out, I'm going to Bowie. Run away. First part of this says they have to serve out their times according to their indenture. So if they ran away, they had a 7-year contract, they ran away after 3 years, how much time do they have to make up? 4 years. Right? That's the rest of the time on their indenture. But that's not it. And 1 whole year apiece after the time of their service is expired. So they had 4 years, but now they got an extra year because they ran away. Maybe they ran away for a month. So now they got an extra year on their sentence. How long do they have? 5 years. That's not done yet, though. But 1 whole year apiece. After that service, to serve the colony for 3 whole years apiece. So they got to work for Mr. Johnson for 5 years, but then they got to work for Virginia for 3 years. So they got to work 8 more years now because they stole themselves and ran away. But this last part is really significant. You guys have to help me analyze this. And that the third, being a Negro named John Punch, shall serve his said master, or his assigns, or his kids, grandkids, for the time of his natural life, here or elsewhere. So what is John Punch's sentence? Got a life sentence. What do we call a servant for life? Definition of a slave. You're never going to get free. If your master dies, you work for his kids. You're owned by his kids now. So you could say John Punch has been made a slave right here. He was an indentured servant. He ran away with the other 2 guys. They did the same crime. But you see how their punishment is very different. The justice system is treating them very differently by 1641. That's why some historians say we have racial slavery in place. You can tell by a case like this. Does that make sense? Any thoughts on that? The different sentences, especially, that they're going to receive. Any questions about it? Look at a couple more. Think about how race and class, again, are being constructed. They're the same class, right? All 3 of them are indentured servants. They're doing the same work for the same master. They run away together. The only difference between them, I'm going to take it back to the true colors, the only difference between them is their race. They're both male, but they're going to be treated very differently because of that difference, right? These categories of black and white are being constructed socially. Right? It matters. It matters whether you're black or white in this society by 1641. Here's another example, 1660 case. Act 22. It is enacted that in case any English servant shall run away in company with any Negroes. So we already know here, this is a continuing problem. Even 20 years later, folks are still running away together. Right? These servants feel like they're a part of an imagined community. Hey, let's go. I don't care if you're black. Let's roll. Right? So they're going to stop that. They're going to give them incentive not to do so. They're going to divide people based on race. Shall run away in company with any Negroes who are incapable of making satisfaction by addition of time. Hold up, stop right there. What does that say? Somebody interpret that for me. Why would these Negroes be incapable of making satisfaction by addition of time? What can we infer? What can we tell based on that legal language? Why would a Negro be incapable of making satisfaction? Why could you not add more time on somebody? Hmm? They could be sick or ill. That's one possibility if you think they're not going to survive it, and it doesn't make sense to add more time. But there's another reason. Think about even today. Someone is seen as doing a really bad crime, they get locked up for life, right? We sometimes give 2 life sentences just to kind of make sure. But technically, if you're locked up for life, you can't add any more time on, right? So this is telling you there are Negroes in this society that are incapable of having more time added. There are people in this society that are already servants for life, that are already slaves. So this is how we know by 1660 there's a category of folks that are slaves. We know that already. That's not even the point of this, that's just kind of the in between the lines of this case. Think about what they're doing. So if they shall run away, if a white servant runs away with a Negro, that the English so running away shall serve for the time of the Negro's absence, as they are to do for their own. So this is aimed at white servants. Look, if you run away, first of all, it's bad. But if you run away with a black servant, you got to make up for the time that they missed. Now, we can't add any more time to them, so you're basically getting more time because of who you ran away with. What that's going to do is make white indentured servants think twice about running away, or really think three times about running away with a black servant. You might be like, I'm leaving, but hey, you can't come with me, because if I get caught, that's going to be extra serious, essentially. So race and class are coming together, but race is still the kind of central factor, right? These factors intersect, and race and gender matter, they construct each other, but race and class are going to matter as well. You'll see a couple other examples that are showing how the legal system is treating what people considered black in this society. As early as 1639, one of the laws said all persons except Negroes are to be provided with arms and ammunition. Now remember, this is a society that's increasingly finding itself in hostilities with the surrounding native population, especially as they expand into their land, right? It's warfare, on and off. So everybody has guns, right, to defend the colony, to defend themselves, they're afraid of attacks, right? Except they don't want these Africans to have guns. Right? They're seen as, even though they're part of the colony, they're seen as kind of outsiders to the colony, right? Don't give them guns, just make sure everybody else has guns. Race and religion is an important factor, right? Race, class, and gender are not the only important factors. We see something in terms of religion here. Now remember, this is a society impacted by Christianity. So even in the laws of Virginia, you see mention of God and whatnot. Remember those first couple of cases, they talk about the defiling one's body and the shame of Christianity. There is something, a loophole that exists in the society. Especially the more religious folks are saying, hey, you cannot enslave other Christians. Right? Jesus was all about equality and human brotherhood and these sorts of things, right? How are you going to enslave somebody that converts to Christianity? That's a Christian. You can't enslave Christians. You can enslave some other infidels, they might say. Christian, once they're Christian, there are a group of folks that believe that folks that convert to Christianity cannot be enslaved. This law gets passed in 1667 to close that loophole. It says, where some doubts have arisen whether children that are slaves by birth, and by charity and pity of their owners, made partakers of the blessed sacrament of baptism. So if they get baptized and made Christian, should by virtue of their baptism be made free, it is enacted that baptism does not alter the condition of the person as to his bondage or freedom. So some masters think, look, once I baptize him, I got a freedom. This law says, no, don't worry about it. Even though they're baptized, because that's one of the motivations of slavery. Racially, they say we're going to baptize and convert all these folks to Christianity, give them Christianity, and so slavery is a good thing. This law says, yeah, okay, you can still keep them as slaves. So again, it tells you something about the status of people considered black. This one's interesting too, 1669. Even the title tells you quite a bit. An act about casually killing slaves. Whereas the only law enforced for the punishment of refractory servants resisting their master, so servants that resist or rebel. The only law in place of resisting the master, mistress, or overseer cannot be inflicted on Negroes because the punishment was extension of time. Once again, you can't add any more time on someone that's a slave for life. Nor the obstinacy of many of them by other than violent means suppressed. So obstinacy is stubbornness. Some of them, basically, if you're stubborn ones, you're going to beat them. You're going to get whipped or beaten. And you can't do it any other than violent means. Be it enacted and declared by this grand assembly, if any slave resists his master, you're actually using the term slave, if any slave resists his master, and by the extremity of the correction should chance to die, that his death shall not be a computed felony. So basically, if you beat your slave to death because he was acting up or resisting, you're not going to be charged. Pretty clear. You won't be charged. It's not murder if you kill your slave. They're your property. You can do what you want to them. The equipped molestation, since it cannot be presumed that prepense malice should induce any man to destroy his own estate. That last part is interesting too. He says, who would, purposely destroy their own property? So if you kill them, it must have been on accident. So it couldn't have been murder. So there's several things just in that long quote. They're your property. You do what you want with your property. Remember, property rights are very important to us Americans, right? Going back a long way. Now, this property happens to be human beings. Again, we're not going to go through all these. The 1691 case does similar things. 1681's again show you some of the fear in the society, right? Frequent meetings of considerable Negroes and the Bureau of burials. Basically, people can't meet together. If any Negro lift up his hand against any Christian, this is interesting because they substitute the word Christian for white. Right? Only whites are seen as being Christian. Any Negro lift up his hand against any Christian shall receive 30 lashes. You read them at your own leisure. So why go through all this? Right? This is 200 years before Reconstruction. Right? Why go through all this? Well, it sets up the categories that we're now dealing with. Right? It sets up these categories of race, class, gender, which people have to now revisit in Reconstruction. Right? They got to revisit them in Reconstruction.